The rain had been falling for 6 hours straight. I know because I counted. Not intentionally. I'm not the kind of person who sits by a window tallying rainfall, but because every hour on the hour, the pressure sensor on my station's outer hull emitted a low, resonant ping, and I'd been lying on my back on the cot staring at the ceiling long enough to hear it 6 times. My name is Callum Wren. I am 31 years old. I am the sole human occupant of Waystation Delmer 9, a mid-range atmospheric research platform anchored at the edge of what the colonial maps call the Greywood Shelf, a 600-kilometer expanse of boreal wilderness on the planet Vale, officially designated as an ecological observation zone, which is a bureaucratic way of saying that nobody has figured out what to do with it yet. The station is small, 4 rooms, a main lab, a sleeping quarters, a supply bay, and what the installation manual calls a multi-purpose utility space, but which I use primarily to store broken equipment I keep meaning to fix. The outer walls are rated for -40°C and moderate particulate bombardment. There is a communications array on the roof that works approximately 60% of the time. There is a hot water heater that works approximately 40% of the time. I have been stationed here alone for 7 months. The nearest human settlement, a mining collective called Redpost, is 400 kilometers northeast. The nearest Vale colonial hub is twice that. I receive supply drops every 8 weeks and data packets every 3 days, and outside of those events, I am entirely and completely by myself. I had made peace with that, or I was in the process of making peace with it. The line between those two things blurs after enough months. The 6th ping came and went. I closed my eyes. The rain drummed the hull. I was almost asleep when the sound came. Not a ping, not rain, not the wind pressuring the ventilation seems the way it sometimes did on high-gust nights. A knock. 3 of them, slow, deliberate, like whoever was making them had thought carefully about each one before committing to it. I sat up. My first thought was malfunction, one of the external sensors catching debris and translating it wrong. My second thought was animal, because Vale has fauna capable of making almost anything. My third thought, the one that made me get out of bed and cross the main lab to the inner airlock door, was, there is no one on this shelf for 400 kilometers in any direction. I pulled up the exterior camera feed on the wall panel. The image was grainy, the rain was doing that, but there was enough resolution to see the shape standing on my entry platform. It was tall, taller than a human by perhaps 20 centimeters. Thin in the way that suggested the thinness was structural rather than depleted, long-limbed, with a posture that was slightly forward-leaning, like someone accustomed to moving through dense terrain. It was wearing something dark, layered, partly shredded at the left shoulder and upper arm. Even through the rain-blurred feed, I could see that the left side of whatever it was wearing was darker than the rest. The darker color was spreading slowly. That's blood, some calm and clinical part of my brain informed me. Whatever is standing outside your door is bleeding. I stared at the feed for another 5 seconds. The shape raised one hand long-fingered, the fingers slightly too numerous to be human, and knocked again. 3 more times, same deliberate rhythm. I hit the intercom. "Who's there?" I said, and then immediately felt foolish, because I was speaking to a creature standing in the rain on a planet 400 kilometers from the nearest human, and "who's there?" was perhaps the least adequate question available to me. The shape on the feed went still. Then a voice came through the intercom speaker, and it was a voice. That was the first thing I noticed, absurdly. It was genuinely, recognizably a voice, with timbre and cadence and the specific quality of someone who had chosen their words before speaking them. "Human," it said, "clean my wound." Not a request, not quite a command. Something in between the tone of someone who has assessed their options and arrived at the only viable one and is now stating it plainly. I stood there in my station I checked the wall clock. 2, 14 in the morning of a rainy night on an empty shelf on a planet far from Earth, and a tall, bleeding shape on my entry platform had just asked me to clean its wound. I opened the airlock. The decontamination cycle took 90 seconds. I used the time to pull the basic first aid kit from under the lab bench, which is where I kept it because the supply bay was cold, and I'd learned early that you wanted your emergency supplies somewhere warm. I also pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves, not because I had any specific knowledge of what I was dealing with, but because it seemed like the correct instinct. The inner airlock door slid open. She and I registered the she not from anything obvious but from something in the proportion and carriage of the figure, from the tilt of the face as it turned toward me, from a quality I couldn't precisely name, stepped into the station. She was soaking wet. The rain had plastered the layered garments flat against her body, and she stood just inside the threshold dripping steadily onto the composite floor, taking up space in the way that very tall things take up space in rooms that weren't designed for them. Her face was, I want to describe it carefully because I want to be accurate. It was not a human face. The structure was similar in the way that many things are similar to things they are not: two eyes, a nose, a mouth, roughly where you'd expect them. But the similarities were the framework, and everything built on them was distinct. Her eyes were large relative to her face, the irises a pale, luminous amber that caught the lab's overhead lighting and did something with it that human eyes don't do. Her skin was a deep matte gray with the faint, almost subliminal suggestion of texture like fine grain that I noticed because the rain had made everything close and precise. Her hair, or what served as hair, was a dark mass, longer in the back, and currently flattened and streaming with water. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You opened the door," she said. "You knocked," I said. A pause, something moved in her face, not quite what I'd call amusement, but adjacent to it. "Most humans do not open." "I'm Callum," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "This is my station. Are you—" I looked at her left shoulder at the dark stain spreading through the ruined fabric. "Can I look at that?" She was quiet for a moment, as if this was a more complicated question than it appeared. "Yes," she said finally. I pulled the stool out from under the lab bench and gestured at it. She sat, which involved a careful rearrangement of her long legs, and held very still while I approached. "I'm going to cut this away," I said, holding up the medical scissors. "The fabric. Do what is necessary." I cut carefully around the left shoulder of the outer garment, peeling the wet, stiff material away from the wound beneath. What I found was a long, ragged laceration running diagonally from just below the shoulder joint down toward the outer edge of the upper arm, deep in places. The kind of cut made by something that caught and dragged rather than something that struck cleanly. It had bled substantially. The bleeding had slowed now but not stopped. "What did this?" I asked, not because the answer would change my approach, but because I needed to say something to fill the space between us. "A tree," she said. I looked up. "A tree," she repeated, and I couldn't tell if she was being literal or if this was what passed for dry humor in whatever culture she came from. I looked back at the wound. "I'm going to clean it. The disinfectant will probably sting." I am aware of what disinfectant does. Fair enough. I opened the saline wash first, flooding the wound gently, watching the diluted blood run off her arm. She didn't flinch. Her skin, when I touched it lightly, testing the edges of the laceration, was cooler than I expected. Not cold, not alarming, but noticeably cooler than a human would be. I worked methodically, the way I'd been trained in the 2-day wilderness medicine course that Delmer 9 orientation had required. Clean the wound. Assess depth. Determine if closure is possible or if deeper injury needs attention. The laceration was long but not deep enough to reach the structures beneath the muscle. The bleeding was venous, not arterial. She was going to be fine, assuming no contamination, assuming no infection. This needs to be closed, I said. I have steri strips. They're adhesive. I don't know if they'll bond to your skin. Your skin is different from mine, but I can try. Try, she said. The steri strips bonded. Imperfectly at the edges, but they held well enough in the center. I laid them across the wound in overlapping rows, pressing each one down carefully, feeling the slight resistance of her skin under my gloved fingers. She was quiet throughout. Not stiff, she wasn't holding herself against the pain, but genuinely, composedly quiet, the way someone is quiet when they are used to bearing discomfort without performing it. When I finished, I sat back on my heels and looked at the work. The wound was closed. She'd lost blood, but not catastrophically. She needed rest and fluids and time, which were all things I could provide. Done, I said. She looked at her own arm for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Why did you open the door? She asked. Again. The same question she'd asked before, but different now, heavier with something underneath it. You were hurt, I said, and you asked. She was quiet again. Then, my name is Sale. Callum, I said. I know, she said. You told me already. Right, I stood, pulling the gloves off. Are you hungry? I have food. I don't know if it. I don't eat what humans eat, Sale said. Then after a pause, but water if you have it. I have an entire planet's worth, I said. It rains 6 days out of 7 here. This time what moved across her face was unambiguous. A small smile, brief, controlled, like she'd let it out and then thought better of it and gone. == Part 2, the HOURS before morning. == She drank the water I gave her slowly, seated on the cot in the sleeping quarters because the stool in the lab was not designed for anyone to occupy for more than 20 minutes, and she needed to be still for longer than that. I sat in the desk chair across from her and tried not to stare. I failed. I stared. You're studying me, Sale said. Sorry, I stopped. I've never met anyone from I don't know what to call your people. I don't know who you are. We don't have a name for ourselves, she said, in the way humans name things. Your colonial survey teams call us the Sivari. She paused. We don't use that name. What do you call yourselves? We call ourselves us, she said, with a precision that made me think she'd translated this carefully. The distinction was sufficient before there were others to distinguish from. I thought about that before humans arrived. Before anyone arrived, she said, this shelf was ours for 10,000 years. I looked at the rain-dark window. I was sitting, I realized, in a station installed on someone else's 10,000-year home. The thought settled in my chest with a weight that was not guilt exactly, but was its quieter neighbor. I'm sorry, I said. Sale looked at me with those amber eyes and didn't say anything for a moment. Most humans who say that, she said finally, mean it as a social gesture. You mean it. I do, I said. She considered me. You're alone here. Yes. By choice. By posting. My institution assigned me this station. I could have refused. But you didn't. I needed to be somewhere quiet, I said, and then felt exposed for having said it because it was truer than I'd meant to be. I needed a lot of space between me and everything else. Sale looked at the window. I understand that. Do you live out there? I asked. On the shelf in the gray wood. I travel it, she said. I am your language doesn't have the word exactly. A watcher. Someone who moves through a territory and knows it and keeps track of what changes. We have several. It is a role that requires being alone. A watcher, I repeated, like a ranger. Perhaps. She shifted her arm slightly, testing, and I watched her expression for signs of pain. Nothing dramatic crossed her face. I was injured by a tree. That part was true. A storm brought one down as I passed beneath it. The branch caught my arm. I continued for some hours before the blood loss became relevant. 400 kilometers from anywhere, I said, and you came here. Your station is visible from the ridge line, she said. When the weather is clear, I have seen it for years. Years, I said. 7 months since you arrived, she said, and something about the specificity of that. The fact that she had been out there watching this station, watching me arrive, for 7 months made my skin do something complicated. You've seen me, I said. Rarely, you don't go outside much. The weather is hostile. It is, she agreed, and then, you sit by the window in the evenings. I looked at her. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the window, still wet with the night's rain. You've watched me sit by the window, I said. I have passed by, she said carefully, when I was near the ridge. I thought about that. I thought about the evenings I'd spent with a cup of something hot, watching the shelf stretch out in the dim light, telling myself I was observing the ecosystem. I thought about whether I had been observed in return. Were you curious, I asked, about me? She was quiet for a long time. Yes, she said. We talked until the rain eased, which was somewhere around 4 in the morning. By that point, the first aid had done its work enough that Sale's color, the deep matte gray of her skin, had settled back from the slight ashen quality it had carried when she first arrived. She held the arm carefully but not rigidly. She would heal. I learned things. Not quickly, she spoke with the precision of someone who had learned a language from exposure rather than instruction, someone who chose words with care because they had not always had access to them. But I learned. Her people, she would not use the colonial name, numbered perhaps 8,000 on this continent alone. They were not a unified civilization in any way humans would recognize. They moved. They kept the land. They had what she called a way of accounting, which I understood to mean an oral tradition of record-keeping so detailed and distributed that it constituted a form of collective memory. Every watcher carried a portion of the whole. She had learned human language from observation, from monitoring communications. And this, she said flatly, without apology, from listening to supply drop crews and the occasional survey team who passed through thinking they were alone. You've been listening to us for years, I said. You are loud, she said. It wasn't difficult. What did you think of us? She looked at her water cup. I thought you were remarkable and careless, she said, in equal proportion. I laughed. It surprised me, the laugh surprised me, and then I heard the sound of it in the small room and realized I hadn't laughed in weeks, maybe longer. Sale looked at me with something new in her expression, something open and slightly startled, like she had seen something she hadn't anticipated. You laugh, she said. Is that unusual? I have heard humans laugh, she said. On the survey cruise, it was different. Different how? She thought about it. Theirs was at something outside themselves, she said. Yours was at something you recognized. I looked at her. That's a remarkably precise observation. I am a watcher, she said. Precision is the point. Part 3, Morning and What It Brought. She slept. I offered the cot, and she accepted it without the performance of refusal that I might have expected. She simply laid herself down carefully, favoring the left arm, and closed those amber eyes, and within a few minutes her breathing had deepened and steadied into sleep. I went to the lab and sat at my desk and did not do any work. I looked at the closed door to the sleeping quarters instead. I thought about the 8 months I'd spent on the shelf telling myself I didn't need company, that the research was sufficient, that the aloneness was something I was choosing rather than something I was enduring. I thought about how quickly the room had changed when she entered it. Not crowded. It hadn't felt crowded. It had felt occupied in a different way, the way a space feels when something that belongs in it is finally present. I did not examine that thought too closely. It was 4 in the morning, and I had just met a bleeding stranger who had knocked on my door, and I was not in a position to draw reliable conclusions about anything. I made coffee. I sat by the window. The rain had lightened to a thin mist that made the ridge line look like something drawn in ink on gray paper. I thought about Sale standing on that ridge in the evenings, watching the light in my window. I thought about what it would mean to be a watcher, to carry a portion of a collective memory through a 10,000-year territory that was slowly being pressed in on from the outside, to move through land you knew the way you knew your own body, and then to arrive at a ridge and see a human station sitting in the middle of it, lights on, one occupant sitting in the window. What had she thought? What had she been thinking all these months? I stayed awake until the mist began to pale at the edges, and the ridge line resolved out of the gray in the growing light, and then I went to the doorway of the sleeping quarters and looked in. Sale was awake. She was lying still, eyes open, looking at the ceiling the way I had been looking at mine hours earlier. "Did you sleep?" I asked. "Yes," she said, "thank you." "Hungry, I know you said." "I should go," she said. I felt something drop in my chest. "Your wound." "It will close," she said. "We heal quickly." She sat up, testing the arm again. The steri strips were still holding. "You could stay," I said. "A few more hours to be sure." She looked at me. "Or longer," I said, and then stopped, because I didn't know what I was offering or whether I had the right to offer it. The wound was deep, and you lost blood, and the weather. "The weather is clearing," she said. It was. I could see it through the small window above the cot, the mist thinning, the sky beginning its shift toward the pale blue of Vale's daytime. "I know," I said. I'm not ready for you to go." The room was very quiet. Sale looked at me for a long time. That amber gaze, steady and precise, doing what it did, watching, measuring, holding onto what it saw. "You are strange," she said, "for a human." "I've been told," I said. "I mean it as a distinction," she said, "not a criticism." I sat down on the edge of the desk chair. "The survey crews, the supply teams, did they ever?" "No," she said, "they did not see me. They did not look." "I would have looked," I said, "if I'd known to." "I know," she said, and the certainty in her voice, not arrogance, just the simple accuracy of a watcher who has spent months observing, made something in my chest do something I couldn't name. "Will you come back?" I asked. "Not because you're hurt, just to talk if you want." She was quiet again. Sale's silences, I was learning, were not empty. They were full of something, some interior calculation or assessment that she worked through before committing words to. "The ridge is within my territory," she said finally. "Yes," I said. "I pass it regularly." "Yes," I said. "It would not be," she paused. "It would not be outside my route to stop." "No," I agreed, "it wouldn't be." Another silence. Then she stood, unfolding herself from the cot, holding the arm steady. "I will stop," she said, "when I pass." She said it with the same plainness she'd used at the door the night before. Clean my wound. Declarative. Settled. As if the decision had been sitting somewhere waiting for the right moment to be stated. "Okay," I said. She moved toward the airlock. At the door she paused. "Callum," she said. "Yes." "You asked why I came here, to your station. You needed the wound cleaned. There are rocks in this shelf that have edges sharp enough to close a wound by cauterization," she said. "I have done it before." She looked at me steadily. "I have known about your station for 7 months. I have passed that ridge many times." The wound was the reason I let myself stop. I held on to that. I held on to every part of it. "I'm glad you stopped," I said. She held my gaze for one more moment, that amber, luminous, precise attention, and then she turned and stepped into the airlock. I watched the camera feed until she was out of frame. Then I stood in my small lab in the clearing morning light and felt the particular quality of a room that has recently held someone significant. == Part 4, the weeks that followed. == She came back 5 days later. I was at the desk running atmospheric readings when the motion sensor flagged the entry platform. I pulled up the camera feed and she was there, not bleeding this time, standing upright and dry in the thin morning light, left arm held naturally at her side. I opened the door before she knocked. She looked at the open door, then at me. "You watch the feed," she said. "Motion sensor," I said, "come in." She came in. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about the territory, the Greywood Shelf's drainage patterns, the migration cycles of the large fauna, the places where the old growth was thickest, the places where the colonial survey teams had left marks that were still healing. She spoke about it the way you speak about something you love and are afraid for simultaneously. I told her about the research, the atmospheric data, the particulate tracking, the long-term climate modeling that was supposed to inform the colonial authorities' land use decisions. She listened with a quality of attention I had never experienced before, the kind that made you feel not like you were being heard, but like you were being understood. "Your data," she said, "would it show the impact of expanded settlement?" "That's partly what it's for," I said. "Yes." "And who reads your reports?" "The Colonial Environmental Authority, my institution. Eventually, theoretically, the council that manages expansion licensing." She was quiet for a moment. "Could you include territorial record data, historical occupation data, if you had it?" I looked at her. If I had it, and if it was submitted properly, yes, it would be considered. She was looking at the window. "We have 10,000 years of observation data," she said, "carried in the way of accounting. No human institution has asked for it." "I'm asking," I said. She turned and looked at me. "I'm not the council," I said. "I'm not the authority. I'm one researcher with a data uplink that works 60% of the time. But if you would give me what you carry, I would put it in my reports, every data packet. I would make sure it was seen." The silence this time was the longest yet. I didn't rush it. I had learned in 5 days not to rush sales silences. "Why?" she said. "Because it's right," I said. "Because this is your home. Because 10,000 years of knowledge shouldn't be invisible because nobody bothered to look." She was looking at me with an expression I was beginning to be able to read, or not read exactly, but feel the shape of. Something behind the amber eyes that was weighing something very carefully. "I need to speak with the others," she said. "The other watchers. This is not my decision alone." "I understand," I said. "It may take time." "I'm here," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." Something moved through her face, quick, guarded, and then gone, but I caught it. "No," she said, "you're not." She came back 8 days later with 3 others. This was, I want to be honest about this, alarming for approximately the first 90 seconds, because 3 tall, gray-skinned individuals in layered dark clothing materializing at your airlock before dawn is something no orientation manual prepares you for. But Sale was among them, and she looked at me through the camera feed with that steady amber gaze, and I opened the door. The other 3 were different from her in the way people are different from each other, one older, one younger, one roughly her age but broader through the shoulders. They entered the station and stood in the lab in a configuration that was clearly practiced, as if they were used to moving through spaces together. None of them spoke at first. Sale introduced them by their functional roles rather than names, which I understood was a culturally significant distinction. The older one was a memory keeper. The broader one was a territory guardian. The younger one, barely taller than me, was in training for watching. They looked at my data setup. They looked at my reports. I pulled up the last 3 on the screen. The memory keeper said something to Sale in their language. A sound that was not quite language in the human sense, with a tonal quality that I suspect carried information that the words alone didn't, and Sale answered. Then the memory keeper turned to me. Sale says you will carry what we give you accurately, she said. Her human language was more heavily accented than Sale's, but clear. I will, I said. If you carry it wrong, she said, it does more damage than silence. I know, I said. Tell me how to carry it right, I'll learn. Another exchange in their language. Then the territory guardian stepped forward and placed something on my desk, a flat, dark piece of what looked like compressed organic material, covered in a system of small, precise marks. This is 300 years of seasonal record, he said, for this shelf, in our notation. I looked at it, then I looked at Sale. Teach me to read it, I said. Equals. Part 5, what changed? Equals. The lessons took 6 weeks. Sale came every 3 days, sometimes more often. The others came twice more as a group, and then the memory keeper came alone twice after that, sitting across the desk from me with the focused patience of someone who had spent a lifetime translating things. I learned the notation. Not fluently, you don't get fluent in 6 weeks, but enough to process the data into a form that could be appended to my atmospheric reports with proper contextual framing. I wrote explanatory text. I cross-referenced the territorial records against my own instrument readings and found correlations that strengthened both datasets. My third quarterly report was 3 times the length of my previous ones. I flagged it for the Colonial Environmental Authority's senior review team, with a note that said the supplementary data was critical to the integrity of any land use analysis and should not be removed for brevity. I held my breath for 4 days. The response was 18 hours overdue because the communications array chose that week to perform at 40%, which meant I spent 4 days and 18 hours in a state of tension I had no language for. When the reply came through, it was from a senior environmental policy officer named Harlow, who I had never corresponded with before. It said, Dr. Wren, your Q3 report has been referred to the Continental Land Council. The supplementary historical records are being authenticated and will be presented at the next expansion licensing review. Your continued work on this data collaboration is authorized and encouraged. Please advise on resource needs. I read it 4 times. Then I went to the window. The ridge was visible in the afternoon light, a clean line against the sky, the dark sweep of the graywood below it stretching to the horizon. Sale was not on the ridge. She wouldn't be, she had her territory to watch, her route to keep. But I looked at the ridge line anyway, the way I had apparently been looked at from it for 7 months, and I felt something shift in my chest that was large and quiet and permanent. She came the following morning, earlier than usual. The motion sensor triggered before I was fully awake, and I stumbled to the camera feed bleary-eyed, and found her standing on the platform in the low morning light. I opened the door. You look like you haven't slept, she said. I got news, I said. It's being referred to the Land Council. The records, they're being authenticated. She stepped inside. She was quiet for a moment. Then she set down the pack she'd been carrying and stood in my lab and looked at me with an expression I could now read, or read enough. That is, she stopped, that is significant. It's not a guarantee, I said. I want to be honest about that. Authentication doesn't mean the council will rule in your favor. It means the data is being taken seriously. It means it's in the room. It has never been in the room before, she said. I know. She stood still for a long moment. Her left arm healed now, the faint mark of the laceration a slightly lighter trace across the gray of her skin, hung at her side. She was looking at me. You did this, she said. You gave me the data, I said. You trusted me with it. I trusted you because Sale said you would carry it right, she said, and then softer. Sale was correct. I didn't know what to say. I stood in my lab in the morning light and felt the weight of something I hadn't anticipated. Not the policy outcome, not the data, but this. The fact that I had been vouched for. That Sale had told her people he will carry it right, and that I had, and that it had mattered. Where is she? I asked Sale. The memory keeper, because that's who this was, the older watcher who had come with the others that first time, looked at me with something that was, unless I was very wrong, the Sivari equivalent of gentle amusement. On the ridge, she said. She has been there since dawn. I looked at the window. The ridge was there, pale in the morning light, too far to see anyone standing on it. She sent you? I asked. She does not send, the memory keeper said. She suggested I come first. She, a pause, a small search for language. She is not comfortable with being present for things that matter to her. She watches instead. It is her nature. I looked at the ridge for another moment. Tell her, I said, that she doesn't have to watch from there. The memory keeper looked at me steadily. Tell her yourself, she said. She knows where you are. Epilogue 1 year later. The Land Council's ruling came 14 months after my Q3 report. It designated the Greywood Shelf as a protected ecological and cultural heritage zone, the first such dual designation in this colonial territory. Expansion licensing within the zone was suspended pending a full review that would include, by explicit mandate, consultation with the Sivari territorial watchers. I received the notification at 7:14 in the morning through a communications array that was, for once, performing at 90%. Sale was at the desk behind me, working through a new set of territorial records we were preparing for the follow-up submission. She had her own chair now taller than mine, because it had to be, and she held a cup of the herbal preparation she'd started keeping in my supply bay 2 months ago, when it became clear that she was here enough to warrant stocking it. It came through, I said. She set down the cup. I read her the ruling. The room was very quiet when I finished. 14 months, she said. I know it felt. No, she said, 14 months against 10,000 years of silence. She was quiet for a moment. That is very fast. I looked at her. You're not going to let me have this moment, are you? I said. Something crossed her face. That quick, guarded, then released expression that I had come to understand as joy in its Sale-specific form. I will let you have it, she said. I am having it also. I laughed, and she let the smile stay this time, didn't pull it back, let it sit in her face in the morning light of a small station on the edge of a shelf that was, as of this morning, protected. What happens now? I said. Consultation, she said, with the others. The memory keeper has already sent word. The watchers are being gathered. She picked up the cup again. It will take months to establish the framework, and the colonial authority will resist at the margins. And there are things that have already changed that cannot be unchanged. I know, I said. But it is in the room, she said. It is being taken seriously. Yes, I said. She looked at me across the desk in the morning light. You did this, she said. We did this, I said. You gave me what to carry, I carried it. She held my gaze for a moment, amber, steady, precise as always, and then she said, You carry things well, Callum. I held on to that. I will always hold on to that. Outside, the Greywood stretched in every direction, 600 kilometers of something old and living, and for now, safer than it had been. The ridge was visible in the distance, the line of it clear and familiar, the place where a watcher had stood for years and watched a light in a window and finally, let herself stop. On my desk, between my atmospheric reports and her territorial records, there was a small flat piece of compressed organic material covered in precise marks. 300 years of seasonal record for this shelf. We were adding to it. End. Channel, Alien Girl Entry 220-9, 650 words 60 min at 160 WPM. Film Seed, Androids 1969, thematic DNA only. Stream Romantic Energy Family, 3 engine, C Alien tier, moderate.